But this is for our friend Bren, who we knew when we were much younger folk.
Schizo, they grow up so fast. Will their innocence still be here when I get back? And the apple trees are in full bloom, and their toys, they fill up every room. But it's you, I never want you to change. I want your loving eyes to always see me this way. So I'll take on this road alone. Will you still be here when I get home? Will you write to me, my one true love? Will you promise me you'll never give up?
The women fished for their sons in the Sloe-Black River that ran through the small Westmead town, while the fathers played football without their sons in a field half a mile away. Low shouts drifted, lazy swallows, over the river, interrupting the silence of the women. They were casting with ferocious hope, 26 of them in unison, in a straight line along the muddy side of the low-slung river wall, whipping back the rods over their shoulders. They had pieces of fresh bread mashed onto hooks, so that when they cast their lines, the bread volleyed out over the river and hung a moment, making curious contours in the air, cartwheels and tumbles and plunges. The bread landed softly on the water, and the ripples met each other gently. The aurora borealis was beginning to finger the sky with light the colour of skin, wine bottles, and the amber of the town's football jerseys. Drowsy clouds drifted, catching the colours from the north, and a collie dog slept in the doorway of the only pub while the main street tumbled with litter. The women along the wall stood yards apart, giving each other room so their lines wouldn't tangle. Mrs. Conheany wore a headscarf patterned with corgi dogs, little animals yelping at the side of her ashy hair. She had tiny dollops of dough still stuck under her fingernails, and there were splashes of mud on her Wellingtons. She bent her back into the familiar work of reeling in that empty line. So, leaning up against the river wall, tall and bosom burdened, she sighed and whisked her fishing rod through the air.
Now the welcome mat had changed his face, and the apple trees, they have withered away, and the kids, they just don't look at me the same, and now your loving eyes, they just push me away. But is it me that's changed? 'Cause I've got these images and it just won't go away. So I'll take on this road alone. Will you still be here when I get home? Will you write to me, my one true love? Will you promise me you'll never give up?
Further down along the pebble-dashed wall, Mrs. McCartan was gently humming a bit of a song. Flow on, lovely river, flow gently along. By your waters so clear, sounds the lark's merry song. Her husband captained the team, a barrel of a man who, when he was young, consistently scored a hat-trick, but the team hadn't won a game in 2 years ever since their children had begun their drift. And they waited, the women, and they cast, all of them together. And when the long whistle finally cut through the air and the colours took on forms that flung themselves against the northern sky, the women slowly unsnapped their rods and placed the hooks in the lowest eyes. They looked at each other and nodded sadly. Another useless day fishing for their sons. Opening picnic baskets and lunch boxes, they put the bread away and they waited for the line of Ford Cortinas and Vauxhalls and Opel Cadets and even Mr. Hogan's blue tractor to trundle down and pick them up. Their husbands arrived with their amber jerseys splattered with mud, their faces long in another defeat, cursing on their taggles of pipes, their old bones creaking at the joints. Mrs. Conheany readjusted her scarf and watched for her husband's car. She saw him lean over and ritually open the door before they even stopped. She ducked her head to get in, put the rod and the basket in the back seat. She waved to the women who were still waiting, and then she took off that scarf. "Any luck, love?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I didn't even get a bite." And she looked out to the Sloe-Black River as they drove off, then sighed. One day she would tell him how useless this all was, this fishing for sons, when the river looked not a bit like the Thames, or the Darling, or the Hudson, or the Loire, or even the Rhine itself, where their own 3 sons were working in a car factory. And he slapped his hands on the steering wheel and said with a sad laugh, "Well, fuck it all anyway. We really need some new blood in midfield." Although she knew that he too would go fishing that night, silently slipping out down to the river to cast in vain.
Isn't me that's changed, 'cause I've got these images and it just won't go away. And now I've taken on this road alone, and you're never here when I get home. And your letters, they cease to come, but I promise you I'll never give up. Yeah, 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 I promise you I'll never give up. Colum Mc Cann.